serve. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. We're going to try to keep everyone on the webinar muted so that we're not getting any echoes. If you have questions or comments throughout the webinar, please use the chat functionality. I'll try to be monitoring that too as I'm presenting and try to answer as many questions along the way as I can. If I miss something, Angel and Catherine are also monitoring that in the room, and so we'll try to circle back at the end and answer those that I may miss. If we don't have an answer today, we'll make certain that we post answers to any unanswered questions after the end of this webinar, and we're attempting to record it. So this is the first one of the series, so bear with us, but our goal is to have this recorded and also posted and shared so that you can access this for posterity. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the 21st Century Scholars Program. One moment, we're having a small technical issue. Okay, I think we have it figured out on our end, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So let's start with the 21st Century Scholars Program, and then we'll go into the Frank O'Bannon Grant and the Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship. So to start, I do want to provide just a brief overview of expenditures and the number of recipients so that everybody on the call has a sense of the scale of these programs. We deal with a lot of financial aid programs on a daily basis, but I know we often think about it from the aspect of our own institution, and I think it's helpful to kind of get a state perspective on it. So as you can see, the 21st Century Scholars Program, we spent over $173 million in it on the program in fiscal year 19. And you'll notice a couple of trends. One, you'll notice that the expenditures are increasing for a number of reasons. One, of course, is tuition increases each year. The 21st Century Scholars Program is based on the tuition and fees, either directly if you're a public institution or indirectly if you're a private or proprietary institution. So that's one factor, but the other big factor is that we had the largest cohorts in the program's history that enrolled after the recession are moving through college at this point, and that's reflected in the data. And so we expect the numbers to stabilize somewhat as those large cohorts leave college and we have more the typical size cohort of student moving through college instead. But of course, we do expect the expenditures to continue to increase for this program. In terms of numbers of recipients, it's been fairly steady the last several years at around between 21,000 and 22,000 recipients throughout the state. So in terms of financial aid programs, 21st is our largest need-based student aid program when it comes to expenditures, and it's also the second largest when it comes to the number of recipients that we provide the 21st to. Let's go ahead and talk about the eligibility requirements for 21st. So I think for most of you on the call, you're part of the financial aid community, and you work with 21st, especially when students are receiving the 21st Century Scholarship and arriving at your college or university. But 21st begins much sooner than that. The enrollment process begins when parents or legal guardians enroll their children in the 21st Century Scholars Program in the 7th or 8th grade in middle school. There is an exception to this enrollment in 7th or 8th grade. Foster youth in the state of Indiana are eligible to enroll in the 21st Century Scholars Program all the way through high school graduation. So that is one exception to the rule. To enroll in the 21st Century Scholars Program, the primary way is through demonstrating that your household size and your household income would qualify you for the federal free and reduced lunch program. That program requires that a household have an income no greater than 185% of the federal poverty level. So that's the primary way that 21st Century Scholars enroll in the program, is being in a household at 185% of the federal poverty level or below. The process for enrolling in 21st is actually done as well and during the 7th or 8th grade in ScholarTrack. We have an online application that parents can access to enroll their 7th or 8th grade student. But we also have a streamlined application in ScholarTrack that a variety of community partners and middle school and high school partners use to enroll students in the system. One thing that I would like to share, because this is a recent development, especially when it comes to 21st century scholars that are enrolling through foster care, we have recently entered into a data sharing agreement with the Indiana Department of Child Services to really streamline the way that we enroll foster youth in the 21st Century Scholars Program. On a weekly basis, we are receiving a list of all eligible foster youth from our partners at the Department of Child Services, and we're trying to fill in the gaps with enrollment for 21st Century Scholars. That has a number of benefits. Primary one, though, is that our caseworkers that work for the Department of Child Services, it allows them to focus not just on the enrollment part of 21st, but on the student preparation and success components of 21st, making certain that our 21st Century Scholars are able to get across the finish line, meet the high school graduation requirements, and actually go to college and receive the 21st Century Scholarship. I want to keep going. The 21st Century Scholars Program, you do have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen to be able to enroll and to receive the 21st Century Scholarship, and that's the case for all of our student aid programs that the Commission provides. 21st Century Scholars must be Indiana residents. During enrollment, they must be Indiana residents, and they must be enrolled at an accredited Indiana middle school or high school. To receive the 21st Century Scholarship, if the student is a dependent student, both the student as well as the parent on the FAFSA must be Indiana residents on the FAFSA by December 31st of the year that falls before the award year that the student is applying for. So for a student that is applying to use the 21st Century Scholarship in 2020, 2021, the student, as well as if they're dependent, their parent, would have to be an Indiana resident as of December 31st, 2019. Students, to be able to receive the 21st Century Scholarship once they enroll in middle school, would need to complete the Scholar Success Program in high school as well. The Scholar Success Program is a series of grade-specific college readiness activities that students complete. Most of these activities, they actually can, they complete and log the activity directly in ScholarTrack. And to do that, most of these activities, they have to do something and then they have to complete a questionnaire in ScholarTrack to satisfy the requirement. In addition to our Scholar Success Program, students that are enrolled in the 21st Century Scholars Program must graduate high school with at least a Core 40 high school diploma or better, and at least a 2.5 cumulative GPA. And again, they do have to graduate from an accredited Indiana high school to be able to receive the 21st Century Scholarship. 21st can only be used for tuition and regularly assessed fees, and I think most of you are familiar with this, but regularly assessed fees are mandatory fees that apply to all students, all Indiana resident undergraduate students at your institution. So it doesn't include optional fees, and it doesn't include mandatory fees that might be specific to a course or to a degree program or to a school. To receive the 21st in college, students must file their FAFSA by April 15th. April 15th is our FAFSA filing deadline for both the 21st Century Scholarship as well as our Franco-Bannon grant. Our other financial aid programs either have a separate FAFSA filing requirement with a separate deadline that tends to coincide with a separate application deadline, or there is no application deadline. So the April 15th deadline is for the 21st Century Scholarship as well as for the Frank O'Bannon Grant. For 21st Century Scholars, while we do check for eligibility to see that the student is in a household that's income eligible when they're in the 7th or 8th grade, we are also required to check that the student continues to demonstrate financial need when they're in college. We do that through what's called a secondary financial means test, or you'll often hear it just called the financial means test. And we'll get into that in just a little bit, but that's something that occurs every year in college when the student files the FAFSA. To use the 21st Century Scholarship, like most of our financial aid programs, students must be maintaining satisfactory academic progress at your institution. 21st, you do have to enroll full-time. Exceptions do exist for students that are in the final term of their degree program. They don't have to be full-time in the final term of their degree program. And that there are also exceptions that exist and posted in our financial aid manual for students that were full-time earlier in the academic year and then are trying to use the remaining amount of their 21st during the summer. So there's a number of summer exceptions that exist for the 21st Century Scholarship. Renewal, and this is a feature that is definitely unique to the 21st century, to Indiana's state financial aid more broadly, and this applies especially to the 21st Century Scholars Program. That is our credit completion requirement. And that's the requirement that to renew your 21st Century Scholarship, students must earn at least 30 credit hours each year. When we're talking about credit hours, we're looking at not just the credit hours that the student earns in the year they're using their 21st Century Scholarship. We also take into consideration any hours that the student may have earned before high school graduation. So dual credit, other credit hours earned before high school graduation, like dual enrollment. But we're also looking at hours that your institution awards based off of advanced placement or international baccalaureate exam scores. Those are all hours that go into the credit bank, and they can help if the student does not meet 30 credit hours within their award year. So how is the 21st created? So before we can create a 21st Century Scholarship for a student, we have to receive the high school GPA and the diploma type from our high school partners throughout the state. That's something that our high schools do in ScholarTrack. They report that each year. We do have a deadline in June that we set for our high schools to report that information to us, and we're waiting until that deadline passes before we start to create award offers for students, because we want to make certain that we're providing accurate award offers for students as much as we can there. There are high schools throughout the state that sometimes don't meet that deadline for one reason or another. Sometimes students are still enrolled in high school when our deadline passes because of that school's specific academic calendar or because some students are completing up coursework over the summer. So not possible for all high schools to report before that deadline, but the vast majority can, and our outreach team works with high schools throughout the state to help them submit that data to us. We, of course, have to have a FAFSA for the student as well, filed on time by April 15th. One question that came up, and I think we answered it in the chat, but just want to make sure everyone's aware, the deadline for enrolling in the 21st Century Scholars Program in the 7th or 8th grade, that's June 30th. So the enrollment is June 30th of the 8th grade year. Students have a couple of opportunities to apply if they're going through the income route in the 7th or 8th grade to qualify for the 21st Century Scholarship, but that deadline is always June 30th of each year.
She said, is the streamlined application to sign up new? Is there a way to get more information about that?
So the question was related to, we received a question about the streamlined 21st Century Scholars application that I mentioned. It's not new. It's been with us since the launch of ScholarTrack. It's something that right now is only available to our high school partners as well as some select community partner organizations. Right now, that's not a feature that's available to our college financial aid offices throughout the state. But we are looking at ways that we can revamp our community partner access to maybe extend that as well to select colleges and universities. It's something that's going to be separate from your permission to access ScholarTrack as part of the financial aid office. But it's something that we're actually exploring ways that we can kind of extend that to you in certain cases. So it's a good question, and that's something we're going to continue to take a look at probably this spring when we start looking at those user permissions. So I mentioned that 21st Century Scholars have to file the FAFSA by April 15th. The financial means test, they have to, of course, go through that financial means test and not be removed from the program after we evaluate their continuing financial need. And then students must complete the High School Scholar Success Program as well. That's those 12 activities in ScholarTrack that students must complete.
There's another question that came in, Colby, about
Okay.
student eligibility.
All right. We do have another question. I'm going to answer that real quick. The question is regarding dependent students establishing eligibility for state aid. So I had mentioned with Indiana residency that for dependent students, we're looking at the state of residence of both the student as well as the parent on the FAFSA. And that is true if the student has never used state aid. Once the student has used 21st for a year, then in subsequent years, if the parent no longer is an Indiana resident, we're going to look only at the residency of the student. So if the parent, after the first year in college, moves out of state, that's not going to impact the 21st Century Scholar from receiving their scholarship because they're not an Indiana resident. For renewing students, let's move on to renewing students. For renewing students, I mentioned credit completion. They have to earn 30 credit hours a year before we create an award offer for a student. They have to be meeting SAP at your institution, satisfactory academic progress. They have to, of course, file the FAFSA by April 15th as well. And renewing students, too, have to meet the financial means test and pass through that. Let's go into some detail about the financial means test because this is something that I think many of you probably recall a memo that we sent out, and we've been trying to talk about it at the ISFAA conference as an example about the change that we've made to the financial means test for this year, for this upcoming year. So beginning with the high school graduating class of 2020, we are going to begin to use a different way of evaluating the financial means test. Currently, the current process, we look at expected family contribution on the FAFSA for our 21st Century Scholars that are subject to the means test. So we look on the FAFSA each year at EFC. Currently, that threshold is 24,570. So it's a very, very high EFC threshold currently. Starting this next award year with the graduating class of 2020, we will begin using the household size and household income on the FAFSA to administer the financial means test for our 21st Century Scholars. So the threshold is also changing. This is really bringing this in line with the initial income checks that we do when we're enrolling students in the 21st Century Scholars program initially. So we're looking at household size and household income. And instead of looking at 185% of the federal poverty level, which is the cutoff for initial enrollment in the 21st Century Scholars program, we're looking instead at 370% of the federal poverty level. So the students don't have to submit anything else. We're pulling household size and household income straight from the FAFSA, and we'll touch on in just a bit which specific fields we're using to do that, because that's a common question that has come up. But the threshold is based off of your household size and household income and how that relates to the federal poverty level. So that threshold is set at 370%. We are grandfathering in students that are currently in the pipeline, in college. We're going to hold them still to the original financial means test method, which is using the expected family contribution for a few years. So those students that graduated, those scholars that graduated before 2020 from high school, and that are subject to the financial means test, they're going to be held to the 24,570 EFC threshold until we get into the 2023-2024 academic year. So we're going to give those scholars some time to progress through college, hold them to that original standard that we had set, and then all new scholars are going to be subject to the income and household size standard. Eventually, after 2023-2024, all scholars will be held to this new household size and household income method for determining the financial means test.
Colby, there's two questions that came in. One was to me privately, and I know we're going to address it in another slide, but it was about the financial means test for 21st. If they meet it, if they don't meet it in their freshman year, can they meet it in later years?
Okay.
21st. And the second question was about the residency rule, if it applies to Franco-Bannon and CVO.
So two questions came in, and I think you can see them in the chat. The first one is related to the one-time $2,500 award that we provide to students that are not that exceed the income or the EFC threshold that we set for the financial means test. I have a slide on that in just a bit, but the gist of it is that students do receive that up to that $2,500 if they've never used the 21st before, and then it is a one-time award. And then after that, if a student had previously used 21st, and then let's say in the second year they do exceed that financial means test, they would not receive that one-time award since they've already received the 21st Century Scholarship in a prior year. Regarding the question that I think is in the chat, if the parent residency rule that I described, where dependent students, we don't look at the state of residence of the parent once they've used state aid. Does that apply to Franco-Bannon and CVO? It does apply to the Franco-Bannon grant. It doesn't apply to CVO. And the reason for CVO is because that residency requirement is not something that the commission determines. The way CVO is set up is it's based off of the residency of the what you as the state educational institution determines. If you provide the student the in-state tuition rate and you consider them to be eligible for the resident tuition rate, then the student meets the residency requirement for CVO. So our residency, where we're looking at the residency on the FAFSA, doesn't apply to CVO. That's something public institutions check separately with their tuition rate, which one they're providing to those students. All right, we're going to keep going. Quickly, here's a diagram, a chart that shows what 370% of the federal poverty level is. You'll see that for a family of 2, 3, 4, that's above the median household income for the state of Indiana. And you will also notice too that we're looking at 2018 federal poverty level guidelines, because when students file their 2020 FAFSA, they're going to have 2018 income information on it. So that's how we're going to be evaluating it, is we're always going to compare the 2018 income on the FAFSA to the same year guidelines. So when we move forward, of course, we will continue to update those guidelines each year, and we'll make certain that the financial aid community has access to that. But it's always going to be matching with the year of the data that was reported on the FAFSA. As I mentioned, students who have never used 21st will be offered that $2,500 one-time award. If the student had previously received 21st, but then in a subsequent year is removed from the program, they would not be offered that $2,500 award. They would just be removed from the program, and students that do not pass the financial means test, they are removed from the 21st Century Scholars Program, and they're not going to be considered eligible for the program again, even if their income in a later year falls and would make them eligible. When we're looking at this new household size and household income requirement, we are pulling certain ISER fields from the FAFSA or from the ISER. There are certain fields that we're looking at. For the household size, we're looking at the parent's number of family members for dependent students and the student number of family members for independent students. Household income will be pulled using FISAP total income. And one thing that we're doing, and it likely won't impact very many, scholars, but we do subtract veteran non-education benefits from FISAP total income. It's a provision in our state law that requires us to subtract out veteran non-education benefits from consideration. On the information files, we are preparing to create a new version of the information files later this year, but currently on the information files, there's a field that says 21st subject to financial means test. If that's why, that means that the student is going through the financial means test. More and more students are going to be subject to the means test. It should be fairly rare to see students that are no at this point. That doesn't mean that they have exceeded the financial means test. That's something we're going to try to make clearer in a future file layout version. One thing that you can do, though, since you now know how we're evaluating the financial means test, and you also know that the distinction is based on the high school cohort, you can get a sense by looking at the information files if a student is or is not going to be over the financial means test threshold, either if we use EFC or if we use the household size and household income. One exception that I do want to mention, it should be pretty rare, but if there is a situation where a student would exceed the financial means test, but we see that they are still Pell eligible, doesn't happen very often, it can happen once in a while, that student will still be eligible to receive 21st. We are not going to remove any 21st century scholars from the program if they are Pell eligible.
Here's a question about accepting a professional judgment adjustment to the income for financial means.
Yeah, so the question that came in the chat is, will we accept professional judgment adjustments to income? And the answer is yes. If we get a new ISER transaction from a financial aid office that makes an adjustment to income, that would have an impact on the underlying ISER fields that we would use to determine the financial means test. So yes, your adjustments will have an impact on financial means test, just like they do today with expected family contribution. All right, let's talk about how the amount is determined, because there's a little bit of confusion about that, and we've had some changes to this over the last couple of years, and it kind of underscores, I think, how closely 21st and the Franco-Bannon grant are interplay and work together when we're trying to create award offers for students. So 21st does cover full tuition at our public institutions. It does cover a partial tuition amount at our private and proprietary institutions. For private institutions, that amount is determined by looking at what the tuition rates are at our four-year public institutions and calculating the average of those four-year public institutions' tuition rates. For our proprietary institutions, it's a little bit easier. Proprietary institutions receive the same award amount as Ivy Tech Community College's tuition rate. So for private and proprietary institutions, the awards are based on tuition, just not your tuition. So it's a little bit of an indirect calculation. For our public institutions, it is your tuition rate. It's based on 30 credit hours, semester hours of tuition. And in some cases where institutions have differential tuition, it is based off of your institution's prevailing undergraduate resident tuition rate. Now, there are cases, and this again underlines how Franco-Bannon can impact the 21st Century Scholars Program. There are cases where the 21st Century Scholarship is going to be a larger award amount than just the amount we calculate based off of tuition and fees. And the reason for that is there are cases where if the student was not enrolled in the 21st Century Scholars Program, they would be eligible for a larger Franco-Bannon grant. The Franco-Bannon grant, as we'll get into, we set it annually. The amounts can vary each year, and depending on the student's financial need, where they plan to attend, and some of the student performance incentives on the Franco-Bannon grant, that amount could be higher than the 21st. So for some of you that worked with our financial aid back in 2017, 2018, you will recall that in that first year of Scholar Track, we offered students just the better of the two. We gave you either a 21st if that was the best award offer for you, or we gave the Franco-Bannon grant. What happened, though, was it shifted most of the expenditures for 21st at our private institutions to the Franco-Bannon grant program and away from 21st. So state law changed the subsequent year so that instead of having to choose between if we give you a 21st century scholarship or we give you a Franco-Bannon grant, instead we provide you a 21st century scholarship that is going to be the better of either that tuition amount that we calculate for 21st or what your Franco-Bannon grant would be, whichever one is greater. Claiming 21st, like all of our awards, fairly straightforward, a couple different ways to do it. You can do it individually for a student by searching for the student in ScholarTrack. And when you're on the student details page, there's an ability to claim on the awards widget. And then, of course, you can do this in bulk by claiming through the claim file in ScholarTrack. Unless you're working with just a handful of students, I think it's almost always better to use the claim file. It's faster in many cases. If you ever have trouble using the claim file, that's what we're here for. Send a ticket to College FA. We'll be happy to help you with that. All right, I want to quickly talk about Fast Track. Fast Track is accelerated aid for students receiving the 21st Century Scholarship or the Franco-Bannon grant. There's a couple of different flavors of Fast Track, and so I just want to remind everybody what those are. The first two is for students that have earned 30 credit hours already in their award year, and they plan to attempt at least 6 more credit hours. Typically, this is going to occur in the summer. So the student would earn 30 credit hours fall and spring. In the summer, they want to keep going, but they would like some more aids to be able to keep going. So we do provide 3 different varieties of Fast Track. The half-time variety it requires a student to enroll at least in 6 credit hours, at least half-time during the summer term to be able to use the half-time variety of Fast Track. In exchange, the student would get 25% more of their award. So if their award was $4,000, they'd get an additional $1,000 to use during the summer. And in exchange, 25 eligibility units would be deducted, an additional 25 eligibility units, in addition to what was deducted for using 21st during the award year. The full-time variety of Fast Track requires students to enroll full-time during the summer. They would receive an additional 50%. So if they were getting a $4,000 award, they'd get an additional $2,000. And they would deduct an additional 50 eligibility units. And then finally, and this one is specific currently to certain highly accelerated degree programs at Ivy Tech Community College, but students can qualify for up to 100% more funding if they're enrolled in one of these highly accelerated ASAP associate degree programs at Ivy Tech in exchange for 100 eligibility units. Those students are able to complete essentially 2 years of study in 1 year. And so those programs are approved by our commission. Quickly want to touch on our Scholar Success Program. Right now we're in our pilot for the College Scholar Success Program. Next year it is going live statewide throughout the state, and it will first impact award renewal for scholars, not in 2020, 2021. It'll first impact award renewal in 2021, 2022. In part, the College Scholar Success Program is rebranding some of the existing requirements that we expect of scholars, like our credit completion requirement, but there are new requirements that scholars will have to complete annually. They'll have to complete a college engagement activity each year. They'll have to complete a career preparation activity each year. And then annually, they're going to need to log into ScholarTrack and identify a mentor or champion. It could be someone at your school. It could be someone outside of your school that is their advocate. That's going to help them, guide them through college, and help them with that transition into their career after college. So there's a number of ways to complete that. I wanted to show you this diagram because I think it does a little bit better job. On the college performance side, again, we are repackaging. It includes the completing 30 credit hours a year, so that's not new. maintaining satisfactory academic progress, filing the FAFSA, and the new part over there is identifying that mentor or champion. On the two columns on the right-hand side, the college engagement and career preparation, students do need to complete one a year. Some of these activities can be repeated. So you'll see that there are some, like a summer bridge program, a first-year experience. Those are activities that can only be completed one time, but some, like study abroad, campus involvement, they're a little bit broader, and they can be repeated multiple times. We know that that's going to look different, especially the college campus involvement piece. That's going to look different depending on your type of institution. So if you are struggling to figure out what might satisfy that requirement at your institution, let us know. We'll work with you to try to identify some activities for 21st Century Scholars at your institution that might qualify. We're willing to work with you. And we're currently in that pilot phase, and so we're gaining a lot of information from institutions of all different types during that process. And then on the career preparation side, same thing. There's a number of activities like an informational interview, job shadowing, a professional resume that are one-time activities, but students can do an internship or student-faculty research as many times as they want to satisfy the requirement. Before I transition to the Frank O'Bannon Grant, just want to show where the 21st Century Scholarship falls in our Order of Aid application. We do an Order of Aid application because when we're offering you a 21st Century Scholarship, and it comes with a dollar amount, but we're not, I think it's helpful to think of the award amount that we provide as the maximum award amount. And you have to use your Order of Aid application as well as the eligible charges. So for 21st, the tuition and regularly assessed fees, you need to look at both those tuition and regularly assessed fees as well as any of the aid that is above the 21st Century Scholarship on this Order of Aid application to determine what the actual amount of 21st can be at your institution for an academic term. So 21st is very much high up on that Order of Aid application. It's what we call a first dollar award because very few things are applied before the 21st. The only things that are applied would be any private or institutional aid that the student receives that is specific to tuition and fees, as well as any tuition assistance from the U.S. Army or other branches of the armed forces. All right, let's transition to Frank O'Bannon. So the Frank O'Bannon Grant, you will see that expenditures have actually been up and down. Part of the reason for this is, of course, an improving economy. That always has an impact on our Frank O'Bannon Grant expenditures. You will see that between fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 18, we would expect to see an increase because we adopted the increased schedule of award amounts in the 17-18 award year, which mostly falls under fiscal year 18. So we would expect to see an increase in that year. But that was also the year where we would offer the Frank O'Bannon Grant to 21st Century Scholars, where the Frank O'Bannon was a bigger award amount. And so that also increased expenditures in that year. And part of the reason why it has tapered off in fiscal year 19 is because we're now paying just an increased amount out of our 21st Century Scholarship. So we spent over $150 million. It's the second largest need-based financial aid program we provide here at the state by expenditures, but it is the largest program by number of recipients. And aside from the bump in fiscal year 18 because we offered the O'Bannon Grant to some 21st Century Scholars, it has hovered around 37, 38, 39,000 in that ballpark over time. The Frank O'Bannon Grant, you'll often see something that looks very similar to this. This is our schedule of awards. This is something that our commission, the actual Indiana Commission for Higher Education, has to review and vote upon each year. So it's something that's set each year. It's similar to your Pell Schedule of Awards, but far, far fewer cells. We don't break it out by specific cost of attendance. We kind of approximate cost of attendance by institution type. And so we have 3 institution cells, institution type rows on the Schedule of Awards for private institutions, for 4-year public institutions, and then we have a row for our proprietary institutions, as well as Ivy Tech Community College. Across the top of the Frank O'Bannon grant schedule, you'll see that the primary way we determine the amount is by looking at expected family contribution. So we do have cells with a range for expected family contribution. And then you'll also see that there are 2 different award levels. There's an on-time award level as well as a full-time award level. Students have never used state aid before. They're going to get the on-time amount. When students renew, to get the on-time amount, students have to meet 30 credit hours a year. To qualify for the Frank O'Bannon grant, you do have to earn at least 24 credit hours a year. And if you do that, but you don't earn the 30, that's when you get the full-time amount. Quickly, you'll see that there are a number of student performance incentives as well that students can qualify for on the right-hand side. We'll touch on those in just a bit, but it's a la carte. Some students can get a base award, no student performance incentives. Some students can get a student performance incentive and no base award. And I think that's essentially what this slide summarizes is what I just said, which is that students can get a base award without qualifying for any of the student performance incentives. But there are also scenarios where a student can qualify for one of the student performance incentives, but their EFC doesn't qualify them for a base award. Let's dive into the specific incentives. The first one, and by far the largest one in terms of the number of recipients, is our academic honors incentive. So the academic honors incentive works a little bit differently depending on if you are a first-year student or if you have previously used aid. So if you're a first-year student and have not previously used aid, we're primarily going to reward you a academic honors incentive if you graduated from an Indiana high school with an academic or technical honors diploma. So that's something that, again, we get from our high school partners. If you've not used aid before and we see that you've received one of those diploma types, then we'll give you this incentive if you meet all the other requirements for the Frank O'Bannon grant. A question came about the chart for 2021 being available. So we are actually in the process right now of readopting the Frank O'Bannon grant schedule of awards for 2020, 2021. So that's something, like I said, has to be done every year. So tomorrow we will be starting that process. This is really good timing. Tomorrow I'll be presenting a new schedule of awards to our subcommittee of our overall Commission for Higher Education. We'll make certain that before this goes in front of the full Commission for Higher Education at its March 12th meeting, we plan to distribute the draft schedule to ISFAA Government Relations so that they can take a look at it as well. But the good news is that we expect to have a relatively small increase to the Frank O'Bannon grant schedule of awards. But once that is adopted by our commission members, we will make certain to distribute that to, we'll of course send it out over to all of our ScholarTrack users, and we'll post it as well on our website and then to the ISFAA listserv. So March 12th is the date that we're targeting for the full commission to adopt that schedule, and then after that we'll communicate it out. Going back to the academic honors incentive, I said for first-year students, it's based on that high school diploma type. For renewing students, it's based off of your GPA in college. So that credit completion data that you're reporting to determine if a student's meeting 30 or 24 credit hours, we're also asking you for the cumulative GPA at the end of that academic term. And that's what we're using to determine if the student receives the academic honors incentive when they renew. In terms of count, there are far fewer associate degree incentives that are awarded, but it is something that is available to students in any year that they are applying for the Franco-Bannon grant. To qualify for the incentive, students have to not only earn an associate degree, but the way the state law is written, the students have to earn that associate degree before they enroll in a bachelor's degree program. And that's the reason why we don't ask the institutions that are where the students earn their associate degree to necessarily report that data directly. We rely on the four-year institutions to verify that the associate degree has been earned, but then also complete that second check, which is verifying that they earned it before they enrolled in that bachelor's degree program at their institution. So that's how that award is calculated. That's what the associate degree flag and scholar track is for, so that this incentive can be set. And again, it's available to any student that's applying for the Franco-Bannon grant. The third incentive is our accelerated schedule incentive. It's only available to students in their second or third award years, and to qualify for this, students have to not just earn 24, not just earn 30 credit hours. They actually have to earn 39 credit hours during their last award year. And this is one where we often get the question, can students use the credit bank to meet the accelerated schedule requirement of 39 credit hours? No. To get the accelerated schedule incentive, a student has to earn 39 credit hours in that 1 year, in that award year they're using state aid. Now, they are able to, especially if paired with using Fast Track, a student could earn 30 fall and spring, keep going by using Fast Track during the summer, maybe using Summer Pell as well. And then that following year, they may have earned that 39 credit hours outright and could qualify then for the accelerated schedule incentive. And then finally, Fast Track. Works the same way with the Franco-Bannon grant as it does with the 21st Century Scholarship. There are 3 varieties. For the first 2 that are accessible to all institutions, students do have to earn those 30 credit hours, typically fall and spring, before they can then receive additional funding, 25 or 50% more funding during the summer. Again, the exception that's available for students enrolled in highly accelerated degree programs. Currently, that's just Ivy Tech's ASAP programs. It does also extend to our Franco-Bannon grant. All right, so how are the awards created? So with the Franco-Bannon grant, because there isn't a long enrollment process and because there is no separate application, really all we need for most students is a FAFSA. We just need that FAFSA submitted before April 15th to be able to create a Franco-Bannon grant award offer. Now, one thing we do also need especially if the student has earned that academic or technical honors diploma, is we do also still need the high schools to report the diploma types. So you might see a student that is offered a Franco-Bannon grant without that incentive, and that might upgrade at some point if the diploma type comes in from our high school partners. For renewing students, we also have to look at has the student earned at least 24 credit hours? So to qualify for the Franco-Bannon grant, when you're renewing, you do have to earn at least 24 credit hours. You could potentially use the help of the credit bank, just like with the 21st Century Scholarship. But if you don't meet it within your award year and you don't meet it in your credit bank with largely from hours you earned before high school graduation, then you wouldn't be able to renew your Franco-Bannon grant. If you hit the 30, you get a larger award amount. To renew and to use Franco-Bannon, you do have to meet satisfactory academic progress. You do have to file your FAFSA every year by April 15th. That's a requirement for all students. And you do have to continue to demonstrate financial need on the FAFSA based on your expected family contribution. Quickly, just want to show you the order of aid again for the Franco-Bannon grant. It's the same position as the 21st Century Scholarship and the Adult Student Grant. The Franco-Bannon grant is also what we would consider to be a first dollar award. in the sense that very few aids, except for institutional aid and federal tuition assistance, are applied before the Franco-Bannon grant.
Colby, you have a question back
I
there.
see that, yeah. So we got a question from Allison regarding emailing students about their award eligibility in 2020. I don't have the specific timeline that I know that we presented at the ISFAA conference in front of me right now. But the way that this works is once we get, our plan was once the high schools, that deadline for them to submit high school graduation data to us passes, that's when we're going to begin to show award offers in ScholarTrack. Now, it will be public, so we're talking the end of June where the awards will be public. A student could stumble upon their award amounts in ScholarTrack. You, as the college financial aid offices, will also have access to all of those awards. It's really helpful to think of it as a soft launch of our awards in the system. And that's an opportunity for you to review and to help us verify that everything looks good. We do a robust testing of our awards every year, but sometimes things fall through the cracks, and we always appreciate if an institution brings an issue to our attention too. So the date that we intend to release the award offers and make that public is actually June 22nd. And so once 2 weeks pass and we get through the 4th of July holiday, we're going to begin sending award notifications to students on July 6th. And that is, we are actually sending award notifications around the clock. Every 2 weeks, I believe, we send award notifications to students, to new students that may now just be offered an award. That includes spring starters that perhaps start their Franco-Bannon grant a little bit later and so are renewing their Franco-Bannon grant a little bit later. But that also includes students that qualify for some of our other financial aid programs like our adult student grant and our workforce ready grant. So we're sending award notifications on a continuous basis, but we'll start to send 2020, 2021 award notifications, so the vast majority of them, starting July 6th. And we always try to stagger that. Got a question. Can you speak to how tuition remission exchange programs are included in the order of aid application? And that's from Sherry. So yeah, so as you can see on the order of aid application slide currently, you'll see that tuition and fee exemptions fall below the Franco-Bannon grant, as well as the 21st Century Scholarship. So when a student is offered both the Franco-Bannon grant, the 21st Century Scholarship, and our CVO benefit, CVO is applied after the Franco-Bannon grant or 21st. If this is something that isn't CVO, if it's another type of tuition remission that maybe is institution specific, maybe it's something that you're specifically providing as institutional aid for a student, then you'll notice that that does change the order. CVO is number 6 on the list and below the Franco-Bannon grant, but private and institutional grant aid that's specific for tuition and fees, that is applied before the Franco-Bannon grant. So the question came in from Nicole Sharp, and the irony is I don't have a Franco-Bannon grant schedule in front of me, but the question is, what is the ESC cap for a student who is not eligible for the Franco-Bannon grant base award, but can receive the academic honors incentive award? Oh, I can't answer it. So that's right now, that's $9,000. So it's up to $9,000 a student can receive at a private institution, the Franco-Bannon grant student performance incentives. I believe on the current schedule of award, at private institutions, the base award stops at, and I believe it stops at $7,000. I believe we'll have to look at the schedule right now. We're pulling it up right now. I apologize because I've been working between a couple different schedules right now as I've been preparing with this new schedule for the commission. So the base awards stop at a private institution at.
A private institution is stopped at $9,000.
That's where where does the base award stop at? The dollar.
At 7,000.
Okay, so I was right. So it does stop at the 7,000 for base awards at private institutions.
And then for public, it stops at 4,500. for proprietary certification.
Okay. All right.
Proprietary architect.
So there is a gap between where the student, and that's what I was trying to explain with a student can qualify for a student performance incentive, but not necessarily qualify for a base award. The student performance incentives do go out further than the base awards. So students with greater EFC can qualify for a student performance incentive, but not qualify for one of the base awards. Okay, let's move on to the Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship. If you still have questions though about 21st or Franco-Bannon, keep the chat going, and there's going to be some time at the end for questions as well. So with the Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship, this is one of the scholarships that the student does have to apply for this separately in ScholarTrack. So the student does have to complete a separate application. It is available in ScholarTrack. It's very easy to complete. They also have to file their FAFSA. So there are two components to it. The award amount for the Mitch Daniels is very easy. Determining the eligibility for it, it's not based on financial aid, so it's a little bit easier as well. The amount is always $4,000. It's never not $4,000. It's either zero and the student it's not offered, or the student is eligible for and will receive the full $4,000. It's not limited to tuition and fees. It's not limited to cost of attendance. That's how the scholarship has been established in state law. So we'll continue. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the specific eligibility requirements, the yes-no that's determined by, this is actually something that we don't determine in isolation. We actually work with our partners at the Indiana Department of Education to determine if the student graduated early and met the requirements for graduating early. Some of it we do check on the FAFSA, like U.S. citizen, eligible non-citizen, and Indiana resident. But some of these requirements that you can see here are verified by our partners at the Indiana Department of Education. So you can see applicants must have had legal settlement in Indiana for at least the last 2 semesters prior to graduating from high school. They must have attended a publicly supported high school on a full-time equivalency basis for at least the last 2 semesters before the student graduated. So publicly supported high school, we often get questions about that. What is a publicly supported high school? Well, in statute, that means a traditional public school as well as public charter schools. It doesn't include private schools, even if those schools may be receiving money from the state of Indiana through the Choice Scholarship Program, the voucher program. Those are not eligible high schools for the Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship. Additionally, students must have been awarded at least a Core 40 high school diploma by the end of grade 11, and that includes any summer coursework completed by July 1 of the year of graduation. So students that maybe graduate early but only get a general diploma are not eligible for Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship. Students cannot have been enrolled in a publicly supported high school for any part of grade 12 of their 4th year of high school, so they do have to graduate at least a full year early from high school. And then to be able to use the Mitch Daniels, students must enroll as a full-time degree-seeking student at an eligible institution, so all of our institutions that participate in our aid programs are eligible, no later than fall semester or its equivalent, as determined by us at the commission. So what we do is, as you'll notice with the Mitch Daniels, it expires on 12/31/2020. So we've talked at a number of our other sessions about how the award start and end dates on awards help you determine which terms you can apply the Mitch Daniels to. So following those guidelines that are contained in our financial aid manual, you can claim the Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship for any term that would work with a 12/31 expiration date. That's why we expire the Mitch Daniels early. It's half the length of a Franco-Bannon or a 21st Century Scholarship. One thing I want to add, so this is another area where working with our partners in state government has yielded some results. We do expect that this year is going to be we'll have the most Mitch Daniels recipients we've ever had, and one reason for that is we've entered into an enhanced data sharing arrangement with our partners at the Department of Education. So previously, the folks at the Department of Education would log into ScholarTrack, review these applications, but it required that students submit that separate Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship application in addition to the FAFSA. But we knew that there were students that were graduating early that would qualify, and we knew that a lot of those students were also enrolling in college and filing the FAFSA. They just were not submitting a separate Mitch Daniels application. So by doing some data sharing, we're able to identify students that filed a FAFSA but just didn't submit the Mitch Daniels Early Graduation Scholarship, but their high schools have reported that they graduated early. We're going ahead and actually adding a Mitch Daniels application to those students. So the preferred route, because sometimes the data that we get is not always perfect, but the preferred route is that students complete the Mitch Daniels, but we are taking steps wherever we can, if we can identify that a student still graduated early and filed the FAFSA, to try to add that Mitch Daniels application and award wherever we can. So that's something that a little bit of data sharing with our partners has gone a long way to improving this program. I believe that was the last slide of our webinar, and we're almost on time. We were trying to end at about 2 for any questions that you in the financial aid community may have, and we're at 2:04. So I think we have plenty of time if you do have any questions. All right, Catherine and Angel, have you received any questions?
I have documented all the ones that we did receive and the answers to those, so we'll post that along with the PowerPoint.
So Catherine has been documenting all the questions that you've posed. Oh, we got one question from Lisa here. It says, for the 21st Century Scholar Success Program, do you have any idea of what additional tracking reporting requirements we may to do as a school? I'm glad you brought that up. So most of the lift is going to be on the scholar for reporting that they've completed their College Scholar Success Program in ScholarTrack. So just like at the high school level, where students have to complete a questionnaire about their activity and self-report that they've completed the activity, that's how students will complete the college engagement and the career preparation activities in ScholarTrack. So that's the idea behind that. So that's the idea behind the logging of those activities for specifically the college engagement and the career preparation side. On the college performance side, that's a lot of stuff that we're already doing behind the scenes. We're doing we received the FAFSA for our students, of course, so we're logging that in our system. And the students are identifying their own mentor and champions in ScholarTrack. Now, what we are doing is, with our updated file layouts, we are going to send to, we're going to include in our file layout, specifically the information file, more fields about the College Scholar Success Program so that you can actually monitor students and see how they are doing. We do expect our partners to help with that and to monitor scholars, their completion of these activities, and help us with notifying them about the requirement and notifying them of their progress towards that requirement. But that's something that we are also, when it comes to making an award for a student, we're going to be looking at what the students have reported, not what you as an institution have reported. Hopefully that answers your question. So a question from Nicole Sharp. I noticed that there was a new Fast Track icon on the 1920 awards widget in ScholarTrack. Does the student still have to log into ScholarTrack to request a Fast Track award, or can we now create the award for them? So that's something we are going to include in some guidance that we're going to send out about Fast Track again. But yes, so we've actually updated the awards widget so that you as a financial aid office can add a Fast Track application for a student. So long as you've worked with the student and they've indicated they are good with receiving Fast Track and they understand it, we're giving you as a financial aid office the ability to quickly add that application in the system as well. Make that a little bit easier for you. All right, are there any other questions? I know people might be typing right now, so I'm gonna let you type for just a moment. But what I was going to say was that Catherine, throughout this presentation, this webinar, has been recording the questions that have come in, and so we have a full list of the questions and then our answers as well that we're going to post along with the webinar. Okay. So I don't see any other questions at this time. I do want to make certain that everybody has access to our contact information. Of course, I think most of you by now know you can reach us at collegefa@che.in.gov. That's the best way to reach us because multiple individuals are monitoring the inbox. We have at least 3 individuals here that have access to it and helping with it, excluding myself, I too as well. That's you usually can get an answer from there very quickly. The other resource I really want to emphasize has links to Scholar Track training materials. It has links to our financial aid manual. Is this page on our website for financial aid administrators. 4503 is the number. And we wanted to include that link in the presentation. Bookmark it if you can. That is something that is going to get an overhaul as well later this year to beef it up with more material to organize it a little bit differently when we release the new version of the financial aid manual. So stay tuned, but go ahead and bookmark that page because that'll be a really good resource for you to access. All right. Not seeing any other questions. I think that concludes our webinar for today. I want to thank all of you for attending. You've had great questions throughout. I think this is a great way to start off the webinar series. We'll post the webinar and send that out to the members over the ISFA listserv. And if you do have any questions from the webinar that you think of later, feel free to send to me or send to College FA as they come up. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.